It is now week 4 of the NFL season, and in today's video I will break down everything you need to know about the game between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. First things first, how is their season going? The Eagles are 2-1 and so are the Bucs, but it has looked a little different. The Bucs dominated their first 2 games, including a big win over the Detroit Lions. Huge upset. Baker Mayfield has looked really good. The defense has looked really good. And then they laid an egg last week against the Denver Broncos. That shows it isn't any given Sunday league. But this big loss wasn't even close. It was 7-26. The Bucs just got completely annihilated. And it's led everyone to question, is this team for real or not?
Yeah. Well, I'm just not sure about that right now.
On the other side of the ball, the Philadelphia Eagles. So, of course, as I said, they are 2-1. They beat the Packers in week 1 in a thrilling game. And then the Eagles followed it up with an embarrassing loss to the Falcons, in which they were up by 6, and then Kirk Cousins just drives down the field in 40 seconds to take the lead. Then Jalen Hurts gets a chance to respond and just throws an interception. The Eagles season felt like it might actually fall apart after week 1, but somehow the Eagles pulled off a win versus the Saints. But it was another ugly win where Jalen Hurts has multiple turnovers. The offense doesn't have it all together. The head coach is making mistakes, but in this case, the defense stepped up. So for each of these 2 teams, no one really knows what to think of them. Of course, Vegas will give their best guess, and they have the Eagles as a 2.5-point favorite at Tampa Bay, which means on a neutral site, they'd have them as about 5-point favorites. Before I get into breaking down the individual matchups, I'll go over the injuries because this will have a major impact on this game, especially for the Eagles. So on the Eagles side of the ball, A.J. Brown has missed 2 weeks in a row with a hamstring injury. It is highly likely that he misses this game and then just comes back after the bye week. Britton Covey broke a bone in his shoulder on the game against the Saints. You might not know Britton Covey if you're not a big fan, but he is the Eagles' arguably 3rd, maybe 4th best wide receiver, and more importantly, he is one of the best punt returners in the NFL, so he will be out for a few months. Devontae Smith, of course, had the dirty hit against him from a Saints player, which gave him a concussion. Lane Johnson, arguably the best player on the Eagles, also had a concussion, and nowadays it's pretty common for a concussion for you to miss 1 week and then come back the following week, especially with the bye week. And then Mekhi Becton, the right guard, has started off the season strong, but he hurt his hand against the Saints, and he is questionable as well. So while it is too early to know for sure if A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Lane Johnson, or Mekhi Becton will play, each of them is very crucial, especially the stars, and this could change the outcome of the game. An Eagles offense without its 2 best wide receivers is not the Eagles offense you're thinking of, and they will have to come into this game completely differently. On the other side of the ball, of course, Tampa Bay does have some injuries, but they're people who aren't likely to miss the game, such as Vita Vea and their safety, Winfield Jr. So, from what I could see, they're not supposed to miss any time like the Eagles players are. So this is a definite upside for the Bucs. And now it is time for the real in-depth analysis, and of course I will be starting with the Eagles offense versus the Tampa Bay defense because, well, I am an Eagles fan, so I have to play some favorites. So the Eagles offense, how has it looked so far this year? They've put up 23 points per game. They've turned the ball over all the time. Jalen Hurts, well, he's looked good for most of the game. He just has 2 or 3 or 4 very stupid plays where he just turns the ball over, and it has become a real issue. He is not playing up to his standard. He's not playing terrible. He's playing enough to be 2-1 with a talented roster, And while he did have an interception that was not great against the Saints and an absolutely terrible fumble against the Saints, the rest of the game, he played really well. So that was without A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith at the end, and they found a way to win against a really hot Saints team and a good defense. So you have to give him some credit. But so far in the season, I've been giving Jalen Hurts grades each game, and I think he's gotten a C from me every single week. So this is on a elite quarterback tier level of grading, but this is not the Jalen Hurts that we expect. He has 4 interceptions on the year and has fumbled twice. This is just not what I would expect from him. So I hope we can figure it out. I hope Kellen Moore, over time, coaches these interceptions out of him. But these are not fluky interceptions where it gets tipped and all of that. These are just throwing it right to the other team. This is reading the play wrong or making a bad throw. And then if you're thinking, well, is he at least scoring a lot of points? Well, he only has 3 passing touchdowns through 3 games. So yes, Jalen Hurts is moving the ball down the field. Yes, they are 2-1. But this is not the best Jalen Hurts year. This is not one of those MVP seasons from a few years ago. And we just, at this point, have to hope that he gets better. One thing to note is he has been a lot better against the blitz this year. That is something that we will run into this week. The Bucs are notorious for sending all-out blitzes where they send as many guys as they can. They don't care about leaving a safety deep. They just want pressure on the quarterback, make him make a fast decision, maybe get some sacks, get some interceptions, something like that. So far this year, Jalen Hurts has handled it well. But if you remember back to last year, he was absolutely terrible against the blitz. So this will be a huge test. And this test will be much harder if he doesn't have his wide receivers or 40% of his offensive line, even though the replacements on the offensive line, Cam Jurgens and Jenkins, did play really well against the Saints. Asking them to do it 2 times in a row is a whole nother thing. Especially since the Bucs passing defense is pretty decent. The one thing the Bucs have not been able to do, even though they have all this pressure that they send and all these blitzes, is sack the quarterback. So it hasn't been that effective so far this year. They only have 2 sacks on the year, which is one of the lowest in the NFL. If you compare it to the Eagles, who we have not been happy with their defensive line, the Eagles have 4 sacks on the year. So, you know, that's just not what you would expect from a blitz-heavy team with what's thought of as a solid defensive line. For who Jalen Hurts will throw the ball to. So, of course, we have to center this game around Dallas Goedert for the wide receiver game. And Saquan Barkely, he needs to catch some passes as well. But Dallas Goedert, especially, he has the talent to be a top 5 tight end if we just choose to use him. So, just choose to use him. Don't just ignore him like they do all too often. For the wide receivers, it's not going to be pretty. Jahan Dotson, please make that 3rd round pick worth it, because this is your time to shine. We know it going into the week. You might be the number 1 wide receiver on this team. There's also a few other draft picks. I heard they elevated Ross, the former Bengals 1st round pick, who's old and has never been good in his career. So the Eagles wide receivers for this game are very concerning, and there's no way to overlook that. But how the Eagles will score in this game, in my opinion, is the running game. So far through 3 games, the Eagles have had one of the best rushing offenses in the NFL because Saquon Barkley behind a legitimate offensive line is unstoppable, as we saw with that 70-yard touchdown run last week. So far in the season, the Eagles have 500 rushing yards and are getting 5 yards per attempt. And in case you didn't know, in the NFL, 4 yards per attempt is rather standard. Above that is really good. Below that is really bad. So 5 is great. And for the Bucs rushing defense, it has not been that great this year. They've allowed 4.9 rushing yards per attempt. So it seems like if the Eagles just decide to do it, decide to run the ball, commit to it. That's how you win this game. Maybe open up some play action pass, some long touchdowns to random wide receivers. But I think the key to the Eagles' victory this week is getting Saquan Barkely over 100 yards once again. They just have to keep on doing it at this point until they get healthy. Even after they get healthy, maybe they can continue. I don't want to run Saquon into the ground, but this is another matchup where Saquon Barkely and maybe some Jalen Hurts rushes can dominate. And of course, if you have a fantasy team, you already know this, but definitely start Saquon Barkely this week because I just don't see how the Eagles could win without a big Saquon Barkely game. If you've enjoyed this video so far, please consider liking, subscribing, and commenting down below, but back to the video. So now to the opposite side, the Bucs offense versus the Eagles defense. The Bucs offense is confusing. Baker Mayfield was excellent through 2 games and not excellent last week where they put up 7 points. Put it out there again. Don't want you to forget. 7 points. Not good. So, there's the question. Were the Bucs good in week 1 because they were playing against Washington? What about week 2? That was against the Lions. That was the most legitimate test. One of the best teams in the NFL, and they passed it. So, we don't know what's going on with this offense. Baker Mayfield appears to be good. He appears to be a league average quarterback, which is all they really need from him. All a lot of people need from him. Kind of like a better version of Andy Dalton. And, of course, you just have to take this time to make fun of the Browns for getting rid of him and signing Deshaun Watson when they could have just kept him for so much cheaper and they would still have everyone's respect and we would still have the great commercials. But they had to let him go. Oh well. We can just continue to make fun of the Browns. But Baker Mayfield has had a solid season. 6 passing touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's getting about 200 passing yards per game, and this is in a year where offense is down, so 200 passing yards per game is not that bad. He does have some good weapons. So he has Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Mike Evans, of course, probably a Hall of Fame wide receiver, kind of under the radar, but he's just so consistent and so good at catching touchdown passes. So how will this match up against the Eagles' corners? So Quinyon Mitchell and Slay. So I do believe the Bucs wide receivers are really good. I am a big fan, a true believer in this Eagles secondary, as long as Slay is healthy, because he did get hurt on a dirty play against the Saints, but he's not on the injury report as questionable, so he should be good. But Slay probably against Mike Evans, and then Godwin against Quinyon Mitchell. I think they can just shut these players down. I love the rookie Quinyon Mitchell. I think he's been excellent, and I think Slay has not lost a single step. Maybe he will at the end of the year, but to start it off, they have both played excellent, and I don't blame them for most of the defense's problems. Except for that one drive against the Falcons. That is everyone's fault, and I just don't know how to explain that, so I'm just going to delete it, because most of the rest of the year, they've been great. Just delete that one drive out, and our opinion would be so different, and they'd be 3-0. But anyways, I think the Eagles' corners match up pretty well to the Bucs' wide receivers. And we have to mention Reed Blankenship getting 2 interceptions already on the year. See if he can keep it up, or if CJ Gardner-Johnson maybe gets one as well. There is another part of the Bucs' passing game, though, and that is that they really feature throwing the ball to the running backs, mainly White. So he's a super reliable pass catcher. He doesn't get explosive pass catches where he gets like 20 yards or something. He's more like 5 to 10 yards every time. So this will be another big test for the Eagles linebackers, Zach Bond and Nakobe Dean, who have played much, much better than expectations so far this year, especially Zach Bond. So this will be a big test to see their coverage abilities. And then the final part of the passing game, offensive pass rush. And then the final part of the passing game, of course, is the pass rush versus the offensive line. The Buccaneers' offensive line is not great this year. They've let up 13 sacks on the season. So one of the most in the NFL. Of course, 4.5 were to Aiden Hutchinson in one game, and they did somehow win that game. But even if you take away his sacks, it's still 8.5 sacks, which is still above average. So, is this the time where the Eagles' defensive ends finally can do something, or will the Bucs steady the ship and maybe only allow 1 sack or something in the game? My guess is it will be a little bit of both, probably 2 or 3 sacks on the game. Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis both had excellent games last year. The two DTs, the interior of the defensive line. They were excellent against the Saints, and I don't see a single reason why they can't keep it up against the Bucs. They will be the reason why we can absolutely shut down the Bucs team if they can. But they're not the most consistent of players, especially Jordan Davis. So if they're not feeling it, then there just won't be pass rush from the middle, and we definitely cannot rely on pass rush from the edges because Bryce Huff, the big free agent signing this year, over the past 2 games, he has less tackles than Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts has 1, Bryce Huff has 0. He only played about a third of the game against the Saints and has practically been benched because of how bad he is. So this is a huge miss at a big free agent signing. He's not even playable at this point. Vic Fangio has noticed this and essentially is playing Brandon Graham instead of him. The ancient edge over the young guy in his prime, but BG is playing well. Josh Sweat on the other side of the ball has performed back up to his standards. Not amazing, but a very solid edge. And then finally Nolan Smith has looked okay. He's not on the Bryce Huff level, but he's also not up to Josh Sweat. He's playable, but he's not great. So, essentially, what I'm getting at, the middle of the Eagles' defensive line has a chance to disrupt everything. But if you're expecting the defensive ends to do something, it will be the first time we've seen it happen this year because they just have not been good. And then finally, the Bucs rushing game versus the Eagles rushing defense. So far this year, other than last week, the Eagles rushing defense has been very bad. They let Bijan Robinson get like 7 or 8 yards per carry against them. They've allowed 5.2 yards per carry on the year. But the Buccaneers do not have that good of a rushing offense. They only have 270 rushing yards at 4 yards per attempt. So, I think this could be a chance for the Eagles defense really to shut them down. If they could stop Kamara, why could they not stop White and Bucky Irving? So in conclusion, I'm not that in on this Bucs team. I was in, and then they completely let me down and got blown out by the Broncos. And unless they beat the Eagles, I'm kind of out on them right now. I think from a pure talent point of view, even with the injuries, the Eagles are still more talented. I think Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkely can run all over them, and that will be the real test. Can Vita Vea come in and stop the run or not? The Eagles' passing game, it's going to have to be creative. But I think running can do enough. I think the Eagles can put up 24 points in this game. Not a super high-scoring game. Maybe 17. I think it will be a pretty low-scoring Eagles game. And then the Bucs side of the ball, I just don't believe in this Bucs offense that much. After seeing what happened to them against the Broncos, only putting up 7 points, I think the Eagles corners can lock down the Bucs wide receivers. The offensive line versus defensive line will be an interesting battle, and see if the Bucs can finally get their running game going. But I think the Bucs are only going to put up about 10 to 14 points. So I think my official prediction, Eagles 24, Bucs 14. I think this may be a close game at first, but eventually the Eagles will take over and just run the ball and hopefully have the first stressless Eagles game. But we all know the Eagles love a stressful game. How the Eagles could lose? Turnovers. If Jalen Hurts turns the ball over, that's just what could happen, or some stupid coaching from Nick Sirianni, kind of like what happened in the Saints game. But anyways, what are your thoughts? Leave them down below in the comment section. Subscribe for more NFL videos and like the video. Bye.